Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wine.com Experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborn, and today we are talking to the dynamic duo behind Favia Wines and Leviathan. So we're tasting two wines today, the Favia Carbone Chardonnay and the Leviathan Red Blend. So if you purchase the duo ahead of time from Wine.com, fantastic. Get them open, get them in some glassware. If you have not, it's really fine also because we still have them available for you on Wine.com. So yes, these are our two wines, beautiful bottles, beautiful wines, and we're excited to be talking to the talented couple behind these wines. So let's introduce them. Joining us today, we have Annie Favia and Andy Erickson. So hello.
Hello, how are you, Gwendolyn?
Great.
See
So
you.
excited to have you both here, talking about these wines, sharing the stories. That's what we love to do. But before we get started tasting the wines, I know you're both experts in your field, but you're also married and we love a good wine and marriage wedding story. So tell us a little bit about how the stars aligned for you to meet.
I guess I'll start. I mean, it's just interesting because we met in Napa a very long time ago, 1995. Turns out Annie was friends with my roommate, which I didn't know, but she showed up at my house one night, and the rest is history, I guess. But it's funny because, I mean, for us, the first thing we started doing was making wine together. So I don't know if that's normal, but we started making wine in our basement in St. Helena back in 1996, and then eventually outgrew the basement, started making wine in the garage. We were the whole time she was growing grapes for other people, I was making wine, but eventually outgrew the garage and decided to get licensed and started with Favia in about 2001, but really 2003 was our first release. So yeah, we've been making wine together for a long time.
Yeah. Annie, anything to add or?
No, I don't know. I think it's just like such a novel idea to find something that you love to do in life for one, and then find someone who also loves to do that and has a similar passion of food and wine and family and being at the table, and then creating that is really exciting. So we often are like, pinch me. I feel super excited that we found this path.
Yeah.
And just for all those people out there that really don't know what they're doing, or maybe thinking of career changes or something, just go for it, because you never realize what's going to happen until you take those chances in life. And that's been really exciting.
Very true. And honestly, you should try, if you're doing that and taking a chance, do it in the garage. Because there's so many stories about bands and now wine and Silicon Valley startups that just start in the garage. Just do it, but do it in the garage. So anyway, great story.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, and actually my dad made wine in our basement. And I would say it's better to say you're starting it in your garage, because somehow the connotation of people that start things in the basement isn't quite as fun.
It's he's a little more shady. So garage, definitely go for the garage if you've got one. Yeah. So I love that. But so we'll talk a little bit about the Favia wine story, which is your last name, and you kind of doing that together. So what kind of led you to create Favia wine together after the garage movement?
Well, we both love growing things and making things, and so the wine sort of checks a lot of those boxes. I mean, we just love creating. And with the Favia wines, I was making wine for other people, and mostly Cabernet Sauvignon, and we fell in love with Cabernet Franc as a variety. And so when we started, that was really our focus. And we still make two Cabernet Franc blends that we love. Of course, we do make Cabernet Sauvignon now for the Favia label, because we're in Napa Valley and people love Cab, and it's a great place for it. But really, it's just about creating. I mean, if you ever come visit us here, Annie's garden is ridiculous. I mean, we're growing enough food for a small town, and we have orchards and gardens, and we make olive oil. And Annie has an herbal tea business that she's doing. She's growing all these organic herbs, and so it's pretty fun around here. And the wine is definitely the center of it all.
And you're in Coombsville, but and you purchased the Carbone property.
Yeah, so we we started the Favia wines really in earnest in 2003, but we were sort of itinerant winemakers making wine in various clients' wineries of mine. But we had known about this property, which is in Coombsville, for a long time. We were finally able to purchase it back in 2014. So we've been here about 8 years now, but beautiful old historic property it was planted in the 1870s. There's Antonio Carbone and his two brothers came here from Liguria, so northwestern Italy, settled this area, and were making wine in the 1880s and into the early 1900s. And Antonio passed away. The family couldn't keep it going. There was a fire, like a lot of Napa stories. It ended in a fire, but anyway, we were able to reboot the old winery, and we now live here. We make wines here, and we've started this label called Carbone in honor of the family, and that's the wine we'll be tasting today is a Chardonnay, which Annie will tell you about the vineyard. It's right outside the window.
Yeah, tell us about Coombsville in general. Like, tell us about the magic of this place. What's in the dirt. What's it sold?
Sure. When I started out as a viticulturist, or for those of you out there that don't know what the heck that word means, it's basically someone in charge of farming grapes. So I moved when I started working in Napa. I was mostly concentrated on the area of St. Helena, Rutherford, Oakville, and kind of Oakville was the furthest south that really anybody with any kind of well-known brand was kind of up in that zone. But I always was, we are kind of people that like to push the envelope a little bit and explore and try new things. And so we kind of headed south and started looking for land out here and looking at grapes out here. And I was just really attracted to it for a lot of reasons. So Napa Valley is a north-south valley. It's kind of banana shaped. And there's the western Mayacamas range and the eastern Vaca mountain range. And the Vacas are all volcanic. And they end up in the southern end of Napa in this circular appellation called Coombsville, which if you look at Google Earth, it's really fun because they call it the cup and saucer appellation because it has kind of an inner and an outer ring. And they say that is like the center, probably, 500 million to 1 billion years ago. It's the center of an old volcano. And the interesting thing about the shape is it has a little gap in the south end and the north end, which allows the bay air which comes off the Pacific Ocean to come in and kind of swirl around and cool things off. So it has some really interesting characteristics that drew me down here. One of them being that because it's so close to the bay, it's quite a bit cooler. So like 10 degrees cooler than the wines we make from Oakville and vineyards we work with up there. It also has this, because that volcano kind of blew up and was really explosive, and then that ash settled in the lava, it has these incredible white ash stones. Should have grabbed some to show you, but it has these, they almost look like dinosaur eggs. They're kind of whole, they look like a pumice stone and they're white ash compressed. And it gives this really, some say it gives this really interesting minerality to the wine. And when we taste the wines, we'll look at that and see if any of you can kind of pull out some of those characteristics. But great acidity, great airflow, and cooler temperatures.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely ready to. I'll admit I've already tasted Napa Chardonnay because I love it. I love great Chardonnay. But yeah, let's taste through it, and maybe as we do, kind of talk a little bit. Well, what about also your winemaking philosophy, or what you're doing, the choices you're making in the winery, and how that's represented here in the Carbone Chardonnay, and then how, as we taste it, aromas, flavors, structure, how that's kind of reflecting soil.
So I think that our philosophy with the winemaking is really to keep it pretty low tech. We want to bring forward the vineyard character in the wine. And so, that sounds maybe a little cheesy, but that is what we do. We spend a lot of time in the vineyard, and I feel like by the time the grapes are showing up at the winery, we know what we have, and it's our job just to not screw it up. And so with all the wines we make, we're trying to just really bring out what is that special character in the wine from the vineyard. And so with this Chardonnay, we were very lucky when we bought this property back in 2014. Right outside the back door is this beautiful old Chardonnay vineyard that was planted in the 1980s. Annie had it converted to organic farming, which is great. And so we're organically farmed now. We've started to play around with it a little bit back in the mid, I don't know, teens, I guess you would say. But our first release of the Carbone Chardonnay was 2018. And so as we're going forward, we're really just trying to create this style that really captures this freshness that Annie talked about and this minerality. So we're down here in this cool part of the valley. It's all volcanic soils. So you get this intensity, but you also get this freshness and this sort of green apple component. And so for us, we're harvesting the grapes not too late. There's a lot of acidity. The alcohol is not too high, but we're barrel fermenting it to get it some richness and have it on the lees. And so barrel fermented, not much new oak. There's only like 10 to 15% new oak in the wine, but because it's barrel fermented, it has this real nice mouthfeel. And we don't do any malolactic fermentation with the Chardonnay, so it's very fresh. You get a lot of that green apple zippiness and a lot of the fresh sort of like gravelly tones. We love wines like that. We drink a lot of white wine in our house, to be honest.
So do I. Yeah.
So it just seemed to refresh at the end of the day, and it goes great with meals, and so we love white wines from Europe, and so that's sort of our target, is to hit those kind of really fresh notes.
Benchmark. So I'm listening to you both, and I'm hearing a lot from the vineyard from you, Annie, and then a lot from the winery from you, Andy, and just, you know, what is this kind of the roles that you both have and you grasp onto of, you know, you're working in the same company, you know, same winery, same thing. Are you both, you know, is that kind of how you spread your time?
I think separation of powers is a pretty important thing when you're working.
I agree. So it's like, what are your different roles to be able to stay married? You know,
We say that I have the last call in vineyard.
Okay.
Andy has the last call in winemaking. Although there's a lot of interplay. I can learn a lot from tasting wines with Andy, blending with him, seeing where I want to concentrate things the next year, reviewing the season when we're tasting. Like right now, we just got finished with harvest. We have young wines. You can tell a lot from these young wines. So we're constantly giving each other feedback, but you kind of have to have someone where the buck stops here for viticulture, there for winemaking, and then we kind of do the rest of it mashed up, but it works out pretty well.
I mean, we're still here doing it after more than 20 years. So
it's an ensemble with some veto power, you know.
Yeah,
like
exactly right.
But that's great. So yeah, you talked about that. I mean, I'm a huge European white wine. I always tell people just buy some white wines from Italy and you're going to be happy. And, you know, I love that the wonderful balance of texture and acidity and the minerality that comes through. So give us some ideas as what are you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to agree with you and say, like, we're big believers that plants have something to say, and you know, we all have a voice. And I think if you think about wines having a voice and trying to be able to say something about the area, that's what we're trying to capture. All of these plants can tell us things. Like as a viticulturist, when I walk through, I can, you know, feel if a soil is really dense or if it's light and has a lot of, you know, microbial activity and it's soft. I can look at the vines and see, you know, are the leaves turning away from the sun, or are they just like really soaking it all in? You know, all those little cues and clues. But we really do want to kind of have that intuition. And I think that's a part of winemaking that really isn't talked about quite a bit. But it's really important to remember that we kind of have to have this like third level of intelligence when you're farming, because it is scientific, but then there's a lot of it that isn't, which I think is a beautiful part of winemaking, which makes
That's
it
the great thing about wine too, is how many things. I mean, I was a history major and I got into wine because of the stories, you know. It's but I love that what you're trying to do is just showcase that with the earth and the vines and the vineyards and the grape and what they're saying, kind of guide them to that, which is of course right. So it's a scientific process, I guess, but it's not, you know.
You know, it's funny. I always think of it more as a craft than a science, you know. Yeah. I mean, it's more like woodworking or building than it is like a science. I mean, you have those tools in the back pocket if something goes sideways, which you hope it doesn't. But what I love about wine is, it's a year-long process. I mean, it ends up with this, which is so fun to share with people. But when you can taste a wine and then remember everything that happened during that year, it's really fun. So for me, like when we get close to harvest and you can walk out in the vineyard and start tasting especially the white fruit. I love tasting Sauvignon Blanc on the vine, and the Chardonnay when it's turning from green to golden is when you get in that zone where you start tasting these flavors that you want to taste in the glass.
Yeah.
And that's really fun. So we're trying to get all that in the glass. And so I think we did with this wine. I mean, I feel like every year.
By the way, when I say scientific, I just mean like a chemical process, and being that I would never did anything very well in chemistry, I understand the whole chemical thing that goes on. I'm like, yay for me, I've got chemistry down. Got it.
Just to reiterate, there is a scientific part. I mean, we use the tools, the scientific part to measure to benchmark certain things. We taste first, like Andy said, but we're always measuring. We're monitoring fermentations with a microscope to make sure that healthy yeasts are there. And, we look at things really closely so we can make the wines naturally. And that's an interesting part. So using science just as a tool is a way to even be more, even to let your hair down more in the other ways, which is a great balance.
Intuition, and as long as everything's kind of going steady there, you can kind of trust your intuition and work with that as a craft. So
yeah, I mean, we use the science part as a quality control check. The winemaking, I always say, is very analog in our winery. We don't have a lot of fancy equipment. This wine is just pressed into barrels, fermented, and then we stop the malolactic fermentation, filter it, and bottle it after about 8 months. So it's
okay. So tell us a little bit about that, because as we're tasting it, what do you go through full malolactic?
Yeah, so we're whole,
or what kind of barrels are you using?
Whole cluster pressed, so everything's harvested by hand here. We harvest at night to make sure we get the grapes very cold. They show up at the winery early in the morning. We press a whole cluster. We settle it a little bit, and it goes to barrels. And like I say, it's not much new oak, so 10 to 15% new barrels. And then it's fermented in barrels. We're stirring it on the lees quite a bit. And then when it's done with the primary fermentation, so when the alcoholic fermentation is done, we'll make sure every barrel is done, and then we will sulfur the wine to stop the malolactic fermentation. And that way you keep all that freshness, all that malic acid, which the malic acid is like a green apple, it's very fresh. And if you do the malolactic fermentation, you get that lactic acid, which is more of a creaminess. And you also get the diacetyl, which is that buttery character, which is a style of Chardonnay that I appreciate. But in California, I love when we can capture all that fruit and that freshness. And that's why we don't do the malolactic fermentation.
Okay, so you don't do any. So you
none. Yeah. I mean,
I like that. I like that better than partial. I'm like either,
Yeah. Well, partial, it's sort of like being partially pregnant, right? I mean, it doesn't really work.
Make a choice.
So,
yeah.
I mean, you can stop some of the barrels and let some of the barrels go through, but it's hard to control. So,
yeah.
So I would say that, know your area. Like out here, I'm looking out the window because the vineyard's right there. But out here, since we are in Coombsville and we do have this incredible opportunity to make fresh wines naturally, with natural acidity right here in this area, with the minerality, with an energy of this kind of cool little vortex that we've got going here in this round at Caldera, then go for it and do it and celebrate that style. If you were in a warmer area, then it's more suited to having the malolactic fermentation. So go for the plushness, go for that round character. So I think it's just about like our interpretation of what this area is for this wine is kind of matched to what we believe this neighborhood of, this little microclimate neighborhood is all about.
And I love this so much because I get all that. I get that green apple, but then, lees stirring, you get the texture too. And like I was saying, I just love that combination. We can get some complexity, texture, great acidity, but you don't have anything, overpowering, such as really strong oak or anything like that. It just melds, blends, and integrates so well.
It's making me hungry. I need a snack now.
Would you like to write our tasting notes? You described that so well.
Yeah, I get very excited about it. So yeah, if you would like a snack, should we have a Leviathan for a snack? Or
No, I guess we could do that. Yeah,
but
that's
speaking of snacks, well, real quick. But speaking of snacks, though, I mean, this is mouth-watering. It is a mouth-watering because the acidity is so great. It's not overpowering or overbearing, but it's just a beautiful acidity that kind of makes you, salivate a little bit in the sense of like, what can I eat with this? So what would you, not to make you more hungry, but
I think it's really versatile. I mean, we love oysters here in Northern California, so we're blessed, just real close to have great oysters. So this wine can be a great oyster wine. It can be with any of those kind of cool ceviche, cooler palate salads, all that. But because it's got that lees stirring and that mid palate and a minerality, it can really do well with, lighter fish dishes and things like that. So I think it's pretty versatile, and we eat a lot of cheese, like goat cheese with this and things like that.
beer can chicken. It's one of my favorite go-tos is the beer can chicken.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly like, this would be my top, not like if I had chicken tenders. I mean, just the salty and I mean,
although we elevate it we do it in that little ceramic thing that you can get with the big green egg, and you put and white wine in it. So it's not,
that's a good idea.
Beer can chicken, but it's elevated with, it's got white wine and herbs.
I was going to say I would use truffle salt in mine.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I can elevate it, but it's a beautiful, beautiful wine. So, so we're going to move on to the Leviathan. So Andy, talk to us a little bit about kind of the goal or the impetus of creating Leviathan, or that story.
Well, Leviathan, it's a fun origin story. So I'll give you a little bit of the origin story. So as I said, we started making the Favia wines in earnest back in the early 2000s, and 2003 was our first year where we had like a significant amount of wine that we had made and were selling commercially. Significant for us back then was in the like low hundreds of cases, by the way. So we had, in 2004, we purchased more grapes. We have the same vineyards that we've been working with for 20 years for Favia. But, with those blends, we take sort of the cream off the top, right? And that becomes those higher end wines. And then in the cellar, I had barrels that didn't make the cut for the high end wines, but were delicious on their own. And so I had this idea of doing a second wine. And so I just started playing around with the blend. And after a while, I thought, okay, I'm not going to worry about whether it's a Napa Valley wine. I'm not going to worry about whether it's a Cabernet Sauvignon. I just know what I want this wine to taste like. And I kept blending, and all of a sudden we basically stumbled upon this idea of doing a red wine every year that, I mean, on the label, it just says California red wine because there is Napa Valley in there. But there's also, well, here's one of my favorite vineyards here, this is the first vineyard outside of Napa Valley where we brought in Cabernet Sauvignon for Leviathan. So this is Obsidian Ridge up in Lake County. And this vineyard is already at 3,000 feet elevation. So we're already above the tallest mountaintop in Napa Valley. And we're about, an hour north of Calistoga. This picture is Coombsville. We get Merlot from Coombsville, which I'll talk about, and we love that. It adds a real round, just plump note to the wine. And this is a beautiful vineyard in Sonoma called Rancho Salina, which we get grapes from. And this is those beautiful red soils that you find in parts of Napa and Sonoma, which are just amazing for Bordeaux varietals. So anyway, back to the origin story. In 2004, I came up with this blend, and I called my friend Michael McDermott, who's a label designer. And he had come a couple years before with this idea of a wine called Leviathan, just as like a placeholder name on this label design we were working on. And Annie basically at that time said, there's no way we're naming a wine Leviathan. Forget about it, go away. So that kind of went away. But 2 years later, I have this blend, and I called up Michael and I said, I've got Leviathan, we got to work on this thing. So we came up with the label. The label is,
Great.
well, first of all, the name, which, refers to the old biblical sea creatures and Jonah and the whale and, these stories of giant squids and all that. So the label is, the black part of the label is a giant squid going downward, and then the tentacles are up, and the black is like the ink coming up out of the giant squid. So very simple label. Back then we were totally shoestring. So this is like black paper with one pass through the gold foil machine. It was very easy, but it's still got some, power to it.
A very clear link to wine, giant squid.
Right? Exactly. So, but anyway, it's funny because this sort of is an outgrowth of Favia in a way that Carbone is now an outgrowth of Favia, but Leviathan pretty quickly became like a monster on its own because it started to turn up on these like cult wines to watch lists and stuff. And this is a thing that we just sort of put together and put out there, and we love the way it tastes, but it just, each year we started making more wine for Leviathan, and then it would sell out, and then we'd make a little bit more and it would sell out, and eventually, like, it has completely outgrown the Favia winery. Like, we have partnered with Huneeus Vintners, which has been great, and I work with them and their viticulture team and the winemaking team, and we make the wines, but it's its own monster now in a way. So, but I feel like,
and Leviathan is a monster, so this is a good.
We started with these same vineyards, and some of the growers have planted more grapes for us. When we bring in new vineyards, it's because they fit the bill of great soils, elevation, and now the idea is every year it's one wine. We want it to stand shoulder to shoulder with much more expensive Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, right? And the Cabernet Sauvignon is meant to drive the style of the wine. So it's usually a little bit more than half Cabernet Sauvignon. And then there's Cabernet Franc, there's Merlot, there's Syrah. We're now working with Malbec. We have Petit Syrah. So all these different, it's kind of like a spice mix. You have the structure and the character from the Cab. You have this kind of juicy blueberry fruit from the Merlot. You have this beautiful exotic spice from the Cab Franc. The Syrah brings this like coffee dark note. The Malbec is also very dark, but also fresh. So like when you put it back together again, it's just delicious. So, and I'm a total nerd. I love single vineyard wines. We get excited about Burgundy and stuff, but sometimes I say you just want a tasty glass of red wine, and that's what this is.
And this delivers that, and that's the beauty, as you were talking about, that's the beauty of having all these multiple vineyard sources. And still quality, but having the vineyard sources, the blend. So each year you're able to kind of work with what's working well. Do you aim for the consistency year after year, even though the blend probably changes a little bit from vineyard and grape?
Absolutely. The vineyard sources are constant. So we have sort of bringing up all these growers that we've been working with for a while. And then if someone's going to come in, it's got to really be purposeful. But I feel like because we have we have the entire northern part of California as our playground. I like to look at California itself as an appellation for this wine. Instead of all these sub appellations, you just look at, we have this really cool map. It's one of those kind of cartoon maps, like New York, they used to have these maps where there was like New York in the foreground and then everything else in the world sort of in the background.
Yeah.
Well, this sort of like shows all the mountain ranges in California and all the different areas, but it's one picture. And if you look at it that way and you see where we're pulling grapes from, it's really fun. So,
cool.
Same growers, but then as we bring someone in, I feel like we can make better wine as we make more wine. So this is really the only wine that we make that's not tied to a single vineyard, right? So
like I said, like that's the kind of the beauty of it. You've got a blend, and you have these multiple vineyards, so you can work with that. So let's taste it. Talk to me about flavor profile, kind of that style, the style you're going for.
Well, it's really just meant to taste really good, right? So, as I said,
all right.
No, there's something about California wine, especially when you're working with Bordeaux varieties and some of these other varieties that people just love. They love the generosity, the depth, you know, the silkiness of the tannins, all that stuff we can get in California. And we just want to put that in the glass. So and the winemaking is at a level that we would do for a much more expensive wine, right? So by being able to find these different sources where, you know, we're not spending an arm and a leg like we have to do for some of these very expensive wines, we're able to put it on the shelf for 39 bucks or whatever it is, which is really nice. And it's also, you know, from the beginning, what I thought is, let's make a wine, like if we're out to dinner and we saw it on a list, we would buy it because we know it just tastes good. So, you know, we want it to be on the red wine blend list has gotten so big, right? So this should be in the Cabernet Sauvignon and blends part of the list, because that's the way we want it to taste. But I love I mean, right now I'm just getting like all that blackberry and dark fruit that we love, the kind of coffee mocha notes that I love from some of these varieties. It's very juicy. You get enough oak. There's only 25% new oak in the wine, but you get that real nice like chocolate spice from the barrels.
Yeah. And the mouthfeel too is just, it's there, and then it all balances out. Sometimes you have something kind of sticking out that doesn't work or stays too long, but everything kind of like lingers and then fades at the same time. It's really pretty.
I think Andy downplays a lot of times how gifted a blender he is. It's really fun to come and blend with him. And for Leviathan, it's even more exciting because there are a lot of components that go into it.
Mm-hmm.
And they, you know, they often seem like alone, they're maybe not quite as, you know, interesting as you would think, but then somehow when they're all pieced together, it's like the sum of the parts is better. And the holistic wine is so delicious. And I mean, I just can't believe that this wine is always so good for 40 bucks. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it beats out a lot of other California wines I've had. And it is true. The art of the blend is so, not to say that anybody can go and make a single vineyard wine, but blending it's an art. It's an art in Champagne and Bordeaux and California. I mean, you just really have to kind of understand all the parts, so that you come up to a good sum. Is that some of the parts? Some.
Yeah. And I think what I love about this wine is it's always rich and generous without being over the top.
Right.
And that can be something that I think, you know, with some of these blended wines, that's a style. And this one I appreciate because it's really generous and really consistently good and generous, but not over the top, which is refreshing.
Also very, very key. I mean, I kind of like want to be around a fire pit with a bunch of friends with this wine.
Oh, there you go. That
It
sounds good.
This wine
tastes a game or something or whatever. I don't know. That kind of makes me feel like friendship and.
Is it around the fire with the trivia game or around the fire or playing a trivia game? Oh, right. Okay, good.
So we've been on camp outs or fire pits where we have very creative friends who sometimes come up with different.
You nailed it.
Or guess the whatever. I don't know.
You nailed it.
I'll try that another time.
This is a wine that's been tested not only in a fancy Riedel wine glass, but it also tastes delicious in a solo cup or a tin camping cup. So
true.
I'm telling you, we've been using those like coffee, the coffee mugs that look also like a wine tumbler. So those are also key. So anyway, well, thank you. I mean, these are just such fantastic wines. You know, really both specific art forms that are different, but yet they have a beautiful expression of what they are. And so, yeah, I appreciate you sharing your stories and what California does and can do. Is there anything coming up next for Favia, Leviathan? Anything you're looking forward to, excited about?
Oh, always.
All kinds of stuff. Stay tuned.
I feel like we're in a calm moment right after harvest, but we've already got our eye on next year, and there's a lot of interesting things happening. But I would just say stay tuned.
We will. And in the meantime, you just said people can come and visit. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We're by appointment.
Is there a tea bar with the wine bar, depending on?
Annie's working on the tea experience. That might be a thing next year.
It's so cool.
But we're actually sitting in the tasting room right now. We have a little farm worker cabin from the late 1800s, which we've turned into our little tasting room. So we're very small. We live on the property, so it's
Yeah.
by appointment, but
but
yeah,
worth it.
we do
And,
host people. Yeah,
I'd be willing to hit up a tea bar. So sounds good.
could happen.
Yeah, Erda teas, check them out.
Tea and
Really
that.
fun.
So, well, Annie and Andy, it was just such a pleasure speaking with you and hearing the story, tasting the wines with you. For those of you watching at home, this duo as well as wines, more vintages of Leviathan and the Carbone are available on Wine.com. But thank you so much for.
Thank you. So much fun.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, my wines are almost gone, but cheers. Thank you.